Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. The town of Obudajessa wore quiet like an old wrapper, tattered at the corners, but still clinging to the body of tradition. Life here moved slow, like palm oil poured from a cold bottle. People minded their own business, except when it came to the Okoro sisters. There was something about those two that made mouths open and eyes linger just a little too long. They were born just a year apart, but anyone who looked closely could see time had stretched different fingers toward them. Amaka, the elder, had a voice like snapping gum and footsteps that made the ground listen. Her laughter rolled down the street like a bouncing rubber ball, gathering people along the way. Kamsi, on the other hand, moved like a whisper trapped in the wind. You'd pass her on the road and not remember seeing her. She was the girl with lowered eyes, carrying books pressed tightly to her chest like they held her together. Their house, an aging bungalow with lizard-dotted walls and a zinc roof that hummed during rain, stood at the far end of Agbam Street. It had the feel of a place that once knew joy, but now kept its windows half-closed like eyelids refusing to see too much. Their mother, Mama Ijeoma, tried her best to knit peace between them like old Ankara patched into a new blouse, but some fabric simply wouldn't hold. The tension between the girls was quiet, but it hung in the air like wet bed sheets, heavy, unavoidable, and always reminding everyone that something wasn't quite dry. Neighbors didn't understand it. To them, Amaka was the bright one, the bold one, the girl who had turned a ring light and smartphone into gold. With over 200,000 followers online, she was a local celebrity. People in town claimed they saw her face on banners in Lagos. She wore wigs that shimmered like fish scales, and her makeup could trick the midday sun. Girls envied her, boys worshipped her, and tailors bragged when she wore their designs. Yet beneath the glitz and sponsored posts, there was something in her eyes that blinked too fast, like someone hiding behind their own lashes. Kamsi, however, kept her face bare and her voice softer than the first rain. She didn't post pictures. She didn't dance in front of cameras or chase likes. She was quiet in a way that made people uncomfortable. Not sad, not angry, just deeply apart. The town whispered, she must be jealous. You know, siblings and envy. But those who lived closest, those who heard the silence through the walls, knew better. There was no fire in Kamsi's eyes when Amaka walked by. Only caution, a kind of sorrow that tiptoed. If she was bitter, it wasn't the kind of bitterness that bites. It was the kind that bleeds inward. Their rooms were next to each other, but Amaka's music and laughter poured through the thin wall like water through raffia, while Kamsi buried her ears beneath pillows. They hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to each other in months. Some days, it felt like they were ghosts haunting the same house in shifts. The rift between them hadn't exploded like fireworks. It had eroded slowly, like termite-eaten wood beneath fresh paint. There were no dramatic arguments, no flying plates, no slaps traded in the kitchen. Just a slow pulling away, thread by thread, until the bond that once linked them snapped quietly in the dark. When they were children, they used to sleep in the same bed. Kamsi would curl her tiny fingers into Amaka's palm to chase away nightmares. But over time, something shifted. It was as if a door opened that shouldn't have, and only Kamsi noticed. Amaka grew louder, bolder, drawn to attention like a moth to flame, while Kamsi retreated into silence. The last time Kamsi touched her sister willingly was when they were 16. Amaka had fallen down the stairs laughing, and Kamsi caught her elbow before her head hit the tiles. Amaka laughed even louder and pulled away. See? God no go shame us, she'd said. But Kamsi didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She stared at her sister's eyes and saw something she couldn't name, something lurking behind the lashes, waiting. It was in that moment she began to keep her distance, like someone sensing smoke before the fire is visible. The distance grew, unnoticed by their mother, until it became a gulf wide enough for secrets to fall in and never return. And in that silence, both sisters became mirrors of each other, Amaka craving eyes on her, and Kamsi doing everything to avoid them. Inside the walls of that house, time passed differently. Amaka's room glowed at night like a shrine, ring lights, LED strips, and glowing phone screens that never seemed to rest. She filmed at all hours, dancing, lip-syncing, performing pranks, challenges, and dramatic skits. Her laughter often burst into the hallway, like thunder cracking a quiet sky. Kamsi, by contrast, kept her room in shadows. No electronics beyond a battered torchlight. Her walls were lined with notebooks filled with half-written poems and drawings she never shared. Sometimes, when Amaka filmed in the parlor, Kamsi would open her door just a crack and watch. Not with envy, but with an alertness usually seen in wild animals sensing danger in the wind. Mama Igioma noticed but said nothing. She thought time would heal whatever had cracked between her daughters. But time, like fire, only burns deeper when ignored. The silence continued to stretch, and beneath it lay something old. Something buried in both girls from birth. Something waiting. It wasn't until the night Amaka whispered to her phone, "I'm doing the challenge," that Kamsi knew. This wasn't just a rivalry or a personality clash. This was the beginning of something neither of them could undo. The air in the house felt heavier that night, like someone had opened a window in a room that had never known fresh air. And something had climbed in. There was a heaviness in the air that week, as though the wind itself had begun to hold its breath. The day Amaka first mentioned the challenge, her voice had a careless ease to it, the kind of reckless confidence found only in those who believe nothing can touch them. She sat cross-legged on the couch, phone in one hand, a half-eaten shawarma in the other, her lips shiny with sauce as she scrolled through videos with a chuckle that echoed off the walls like laughter in a shrine. "Have you seen this one?" she said to no one in particular, but Mama Igioma was seated on the other couch, her glasses halfway down her nose as she shelled egusi seeds into a rusty tray. She only responded with a distracted hum, her attention caught between the noise on the TV and the weight of her own thoughts. Kamsi, who was in the kitchen, paused as she heard her sister's voice rise again, this time louder, more excited. "They call it the hashtag #OpenTheUnknown challenge. It's mad. People are getting thousands of followers overnight. You just find a quiet place, perform this short chant in front of a mirror, and boom, your life changes." The way she said boom carried more thrill than thought. To her, it was a joke dressed in mystery, a shiny wrapper on what she assumed was harmless fun. But Kamsi stood frozen behind the fridge door, a sachet of pure water clutched in her hand, her brows drawing together like storm clouds. There was no name for the sensation crawling up her spine, but she knew it wasn't curiosity. It was something older than that. Something inherited, perhaps. A warning that didn't speak in words but in the tightening of the chest and the sudden dryness of the tongue. That night, long after the house had swallowed its usual sounds and Mama Igioma's soft snoring began to rise and fall like a broken lullaby from her bedroom, Kamsi sat at the edge of her bed, unmoving. Her phone lay face down on the table. Her curtains barely shifted in the breeze. Yet her mind was racing with footsteps it could not trace. She had seen one of those videos, just one. It had appeared on her timeline like an uninvited guest, buried between posts of food recipes and short church clips. A girl, somewhere in Benin, had performed the challenge. Candles. A mirror. A chant in a tongue no one could trace. At first, the clip had seemed silly. The girl laughed halfway through, looked over her shoulder, and then froze. The camera angle had tilted. There was a whisper, not in English, not Igbo, not Yoruba. Something that felt wrong in the ears, like chewing gravel. Then the screen went black. The account was taken down the next day. People said it was all a stunt, that the girl had simply gone offline to build suspense. But others whispered in comment sections that her father had found her the next morning, crouched beneath her bed, speaking backwards and gouging her own arm with a spoon. Of course, these were internet rumors. But rumors, in places like Obudijessa, carry the same weight as thunder. They may not strike, but they still make the sky shake. Kamsi hadn't mentioned it to anyone, but when Amaka began speaking about the challenge, something inside her stirred, like a locked door rattling against its hinges. She remembered her grandmother's warnings, half-whispered tales of people who went looking for eyes in the dark and found mouths instead. There were doors in this world, her grandmother once said, that don't need keys, just attention. And Amaka, loud and beautiful, was always giving the wrong things her full attention. The following afternoon, as the sun sat heavy over the zinc rooftops and lizards skittered across the compound wall, Amaka emerged from her room wearing a new wig, jet black, long, and too shiny to be anything but synthetic. Her face was powdered to perfection, lips glossed like mango skin, and her phone was already propped up on the tripod before she even greeted anyone. "Let's go viral today," she said into the lens, her voice playful but sharp enough to cut through the still air. She was filming a skit, a fake breakup scene complete with fake tears and a slap that never landed. The neighbors, used to her theatrics, didn't even glance up from their cooking. Kamsi watched from behind the curtain, her eyes heavy with something she couldn't define. She remembered when they used to play pretend as children. Amaka would always be the queen, the actress, the bride. Kamsi, always the tree in the background, or the chair, or the quiet nurse who said only one line. Even then, the roles were fixed. Amaka had always needed an audience, and the internet gave her one she could never finish performing for. After the shoot, Amaka reviewed the footage on her phone, laughing at herself, swiping back and forth. Then she paused. "Oh my God," she muttered. "What's this?" Kamsi leaned slightly forward behind the curtain. Amaka rewound the video. There was something in the background. A movement. A shadow by the mirror in their parlor. But they were alone when filming. Amaka stared at it, laughed nervously, then posted the video anyway. "Not just glitch Jair," she muttered, shaking it off like a dog shaking rain from its fur. But Kamsi knew glitches don't breathe. Glitches don't stare back. By the time the sun tucked itself behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and forgotten blood, the unease in the Okoro house had grown thick enough to chew. Dinner was quiet. Mama Ijeoma served yam and garden egg sauce, humming a song from her youth. The kind of song only mothers remember, half prayer, half spell. Amaka was glued to her phone, scrolling through comments and giggling at reactions to her earlier post. "Someone said they saw a hand in the mirror," she said with a grin. "These people too much Nollywood." Kamsi kept her gaze on the plate, slowly forking yam into her mouth. She chewed like each bite was a question she couldn't answer. The house creaked in places it never had before. The bulbs flickered once, then steadied. Amaka's laughter bounced off the walls, but it didn't travel far. It fell quickly, like a bird shot mid-flight. When Mama Ijeoma excused herself to her room, Amaka turned to Kamsi, her tone teasing but laced with something else, daring perhaps. "You're too uptight, you know. All this long face every time. You should join me in one of these skits. Or do your own. Quiet girls blow online too these days." Kamsi didn't respond. She simply stood, picked up her plate, and walked to the sink. As she rinsed her spoon, she whispered to herself, just barely, "Some winds carry more than dust." She felt it in her bones, in her blood, the same blood she shared with Amaka. Something was watching now. Not from the window. Not from the street. From inside. From just beyond the mirror. Night fell like an old woman sitting slowly. Every creak and stretch in the sky felt intentional, heavy with knowledge that the living did not yet possess. In the Okoro compound, the bulbs flickered again, though Nipa had not blinked. Amaka was in her room, door open as usual, voice spilling into the corridor like perfume too strong to ignore. Her phone's camera was turned inward, she was live again. A soft glow lit her face, making her skin appear smoother, brighter, like a porcelain doll that smiled but never blinked. Kamsi sat on her bed in silence, her ears trained to the sound of her sister's voice. Every word spoken on the live stream seemed ordinary, yet offbeat. There was laughter, but it didn't rise. There was joy, but it didn't land. Amaka was speaking about the mysterious comments on her last post, the ones from a user called at the real eye. "It's so weird," she giggled, twirling her hair. "This account keeps dropping cryptic stuff like 'the door is waiting,' or 'only one can open the glass.' Creepy, right?" The comment section exploded with laughing emojis and shock reactions. Viewers begged her to engage more. "Try it now," one wrote. "It's probably AI," said another. But then came a single comment that crawled slowly across the screen, like an insect too large to kill. It read, "Midnight. Room 7. Mirror. Only you." Amaka's eyes paused on the message. Her smile twitched. "Room 7, kuh? Where's that?" She asked her viewers, but no one replied. Kamsi, standing quietly in the doorway, finally spoke. Her voice wasn't raised, but it was heavy, full, like a bowl filled to the brim. "Don't go!" Amaka turned, caught off guard. Kamsi had barely spoken more than 2 sentences to her in weeks. "Why? You think it's real?" she said, eyes wide with amusement, not concern. Kamsi didn't blink. "I don't think. I know." The next morning was unusually quiet. Even the birds seemed to delay their usual chorus. The ground outside was dry, but the air smelt of rain not yet fallen. Amaka walked into the kitchen humming, her long pink bonnet dragging behind her like a tail. She wore her mood like jewelry, shiny, bold, and always begging for a compliment. "I dreamt of a door last night," she said casually, opening the fridge. "It was blue, very old. But when I touched the handle, it felt warm, like someone had just opened it before me." Mama Ijeoma, who was slicing ugwa leaves, didn't look up. "Not every dream needs interpretation," she muttered. But Kamsi, who stood beside the window rinsing beans, stiffened. Dreams weren't just dreams in their family. Their late grandmother used to say that dreams were the ears of the spirit world, listening more than they spoke. Amaka poured herself Zobo from a plastic bottle and leaned against the counter. Anyway, I googled that room 7 thing. There's this abandoned motel just outside town, Hilltop Motel. Looks creepy in pictures, but imagine the views if I shoot there at night. Kamsi dropped a handful of beans into the bowl with more force than necessary. Her hands trembled slightly. It's not just a motel, she said, barely above a whisper. Amaka raised a brow, clearly intrigued. So you know it? Kamsi hesitated. Then, slowly, her lips formed a memory she'd never spoken out loud. Our grandmother once warned me about a place with a crooked gate and 7 numbered rooms. She said people used to go there to see the past, or the thing pretending to be it. She said only the 7th room ever opened, and once it did, it never truly closed. Amaka blinked, then burst out laughing. On, Granny and her juju bedtime stories. She laughed again, pouring Zobo into her glass with exaggerated drama. I'll just take a camera and go there myself. My followers will eat it up. Kamsi turned around slowly. You won't come back the same, she said. But Amaka was already walking away, swaying to music only she could hear. The day passed like a forgotten errand, slow and uneasy. The sun never fully revealed itself, hiding behind thick clouds as if ashamed of what was coming. At around 4 p.m., Amaka packed a small backpack, tripod, ring light, 2 phones, and a power bank the size of a brick. She wore a brown jumpsuit and combat boots, her hair braided into 2 sharp lines that fell behind her ears like warnings. I'll be back before midnight, she said, walking past her mother who barely looked up from her sewing machine. You dey go shoot for night? Mama Igioma asked, her voice filled with mild worry, but too used to her daughter's antics to protest. Just content, Mama. People are doing it everywhere. I know on carry last. She left without waiting for a reply. Kamsi followed 10 minutes later, careful not to be seen. Her feet moved like smoke, silent, intentional, untraceable. She knew where Amaka was going. She had seen it in a vision that didn't come in sleep. Just a flash behind her eyes as she rinsed beans in the morning, a cracked mirror, a long hallway, and her sister calling her name backwards. The road to Hilltop Motel was long, and snaked through trees that leaned too closely together. The building appeared just before night fell completely, crouching on the hill like a wounded animal. The paint peeled off its walls like dead skin, and the broken sign at the front swung gently in the wind, creaking like it remembered better days. Kamsi hid behind a tree and watched Amaka enter through the crooked gate. Her phone was already live, her voice cheerful, careless. Guys, we are here. The Hilltop Motel. This place is giving serious horror movie vibes. The viewers poured in. Hearts, laughing emojis, ghost gifs. Amaka laughed with them, but Kamsi saw something else. Her sister's shadow wasn't aligned with her body. It lagged slightly, as if it walked in a different time. Inside the motel, the air was damp and still, like a room locked for years that had never been blessed. The walls were covered in grime, and the floor creaked in long moans under Amaka's boots. She walked confidently, filming as she went, narrating her steps to thousands of viewers like a tour guide in a place no one wanted to return to. She reached room 7 at the end of a narrow corridor. The door was wooden, chipped, and hung slightly off its hinges. Someone had painted a crude symbol on it, an open eye inside a broken circle. I think this is it, she whispered, suddenly lowering her voice. Behind the camera, her hand trembled, though she didn't acknowledge it. She pushed the door open slowly. The room was mostly empty, except for a tall mirror resting against the wall, and a candle placed directly in front of it. Someone, or something, had already prepared the stage. Her viewers watched as she knelt in front of the mirror and lit the candle. The glow flickered, casting distorted shapes on her face. Okay, she said, barely above a whisper. I'm going to do it now. She recited the chant she had memorized from the comments. Let the glass remember. Let the eye receive. I open, I open, I open. Nothing happened. For 3 seconds, the room remained still. Then the mirror shimmered, not cracked, not broken, just moved like water stirred by invisible hands. Her phone's screen flickered. Comments slowed. Then one appeared. It sees you now. Amaka gasped. Behind her, in the reflection, something stepped forward. But in the real room, there was no one. Only her. Alone. And then the live stream cut to black. The motel room had swallowed her. That was the only way Kamsi could explain it. One moment, Amaka was sitting before the mirror, her voice trembling between performance and fear, and the next, the camera had died and the silence had begun. It wasn't the usual silence of forgotten buildings. No creaking wood, no dripping pipes, no distant scurrying in the corners. This silence was thick, suffocating, alive. Kamsi stood outside the broken door, breath caught like cloth in a thorn bush. She had not planned to enter. She'd told herself she'd only follow, observe, and drag Amaka away if things got out of hand. But what she saw in that mirror, what she didn't see in the room, left no space for hesitation. Her fingers brushed the door's surface, and instantly a cold spread through her hand, traveling up her arm like ice water. She pushed the door open slowly, and the candle inside flickered as though sensing her arrival. Amaka sat with her back to her, unmoving, phone still clutched in her hand like a forgotten prayer. Her reflection, however, was not still. In the mirror, her head tilted slightly, her eyes looked directly at Kamsi, though the real Amaka had not turned. Kamsi's body tightened. Every muscle told her to run, to flee, to lock the past behind her, and forget this ever happened. But she knew that running from a storm only meant you'd meet it again, soaked and shivering. She stepped fully inside. The door creaked but did not close. The mirror shuddered again, and for a split second, Kamsi saw her own face blink twice, once in the glass, once on her skin. Amaka's voice returned suddenly, brittle and distant, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. I heard them singing. She didn't look up. Her fingers were stiff, nails digging into her palms. Their voices were behind the glass. Calling me. Not shouting. Not screaming. Just calling. Kamsi knelt slowly, careful not to disturb the candle's flame. Amaka, she whispered. Can you stand? But Amaka flinched as if her name had burned. Her eyes darted toward the mirror, and for the first time, true fear bloomed on her face. They said I'm already halfway through, she muttered. I asked them what that meant, but they only laughed. Not loud. Not like us. Like smoke laughing. Kamsi reached for the phone, but it was dead. The battery indicator pulsed red, even though the power bank was still full. Nothing electronic seemed to breathe here. She looked into the mirror again, but her reflection was gone. Not replaced. Not twisted. Just absent. Like the glass no longer acknowledged her. She stood quickly and backed away. We have to go. Now. Get up. Amaka remained seated, but her legs trembled. When Kamsi grabbed her arm, it was cold. Not the cold of wind or weather, but something deeper, as if her blood was turning to dust. Together, they stumbled out of the room. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the candle blew out behind them, without wind. The door swung shut, not with force but with finality. Kamsi didn't look back. She knew better than to test the patience of whatever had been watching. The road back to town was longer in the dark. The trees leaned closer now, their branches like fingers trying to pull secrets from passing travelers. Amaka said nothing. Her lips moved occasionally, whispering to no one, as though speaking to something only she could see. Kamsi held her by the wrist, keeping her close like a child at a crowded market. The moon barely offered light. It seemed to recoil behind clouds, unwilling to witness what had been invited into their world. At one point, Amaka collapsed. Not fainted, collapsed, like a puppet whose strings had been snatched. Her eyes rolled back for a heartbeat, and her body twitched like it was trying to remember how to exist. Kamsi crouched beside her, slapping her cheeks, calling her name, over and over. Finally, Amaka's eyes blinked open, but they didn't focus. Did you close it? She asked. Her voice was barely audible. The door. Did you close it? Kamsi hesitated, then lied. Yes. Amaka nodded, a strange smile flickering on her face. It didn't want me. It only needed me to open it. Kamsi didn't respond. They walked the rest of the way in silence, except for the occasional distant chirp of night insects and the rustling of leaves too far away to touch them, but close enough to remind them that they were not alone. When they reached the edge of Obudajessa, the early signs of dawn bled into the sky. But Kamsi knew better. Light didn't always mean safety. Not when you've walked too far into the dark. When they arrived home, Mama Igioma was already at the door, wrapper tightly tied, eyes wide with fear and hands fidgeting with her rosary. She hadn't slept. The moment she saw them, she rushed to Amaka, cupping her face with both hands like she was checking to see if her daughter had returned in full. Where did you go? She cried. What did you bring back? But Amaka didn't respond. She stepped inside the house slowly, eyes scanning the walls like she no longer recognized her home. Kamsi followed, closing the door behind her. That night, Amaka didn't eat. She didn't bathe. She sat in front of her mirror again, this time silent. She stared for hours without blinking, as if waiting for it to move again. Mama Igioma begged Kamsi to tell her what happened. Kamsi said only this: "We opened something. That's all I can say. For now." And it was the truth. That night, Kamsi lay awake, watching the shadows move in corners they didn't belong. She heard whispers, faint, disjointed, slipping through the cracks in the walls. Not words. Just sounds that wanted to be words. She held her pillow tightly, but sleep did not come. The house had changed. It wasn't louder, but it was no longer quiet in a normal way. The stillness now had shape, presence, intent. The kind of silence that waits. The kind that wants you to speak first. The following morning came not with sunrise, but with a dull sky that hung low and gray like a sheet soaked in secrets. The air was unusually still, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Roosters crowed, but their calls felt unsure, like they too were questioning the rhythm of the day. Inside the Okoro household, the atmosphere was heavier than the night before. Amaka had not moved from her seat in front of the mirror. She had fallen asleep sitting upright, her head resting on the edge of the table, her reflection gazing straight ahead even as her eyes were closed. The candle she had brought back from the motel was still sitting beside her, unlit but somehow warmer than it should have been. Kamsi stood at the doorway, arms folded tightly around herself, watching. She hadn't slept either. Her eyes were sunken, and her mind felt like an overcrowded market, every corner loud with thoughts she couldn't chase down. Mama Igioma had prepared breakfast, boiled yam and peppered garden eggs, but nobody touched it. She hovered between her daughters like a spirit with unfinished business, torn between worry and helplessness. At one point, she approached Amaka with a wet towel, gently dabbing her forehead. "My child, please eat," she whispered. Amaka didn't flinch. Her body was present, but whatever soul resided inside her had either gone silent or gone missing. Kamsi finally turned away, retreating into her own room, where she sat beside her window, notebook in hand. She hadn't written anything in weeks, but now the pages felt like her only witnesses. Her fingers moved slowly, sketching the eye she'd seen on the motel door, each line precise, each stroke a memory. The more she drew, the more she felt it wasn't just her hand that was guiding the pencil. By noon, Amaka began to hum. It was soft at first, a single note repeated with no melody, like a clock that had forgotten the time, but still ticked out of habit. Mama Igioma was hanging clothes outside when she heard it, and she rushed back into the house, heart pounding. The sound grew louder with each step toward Amaka's room. Kamsi met her in the hallway, the two of them staring at the partially opened door like it had teeth. Inside, Amaka sat straight, eyes still unfocused, lips moving with a strange rhythm. The hum was no song they recognized. It wasn't gospel, wasn't folk, wasn't lullaby. It was circular, no beginning, no end. Her fingers moved in the air as if tracing invisible symbols, her nails stained with something dark and dried. Mama Igioma gasped. "This is not my child," she whispered. She backed away and stumbled slightly, clutching her wrapper. Kamsi remained where she stood, not out of courage, but necessity. She had known it would get worse. She had known the moment her sister opened that door, the moment the candle had flickered in a room meant to stay forgotten. The humming continued for hours, broken only once, when Amaka looked directly at the mirror and spoke a single word. "Almost." Nothing more. Just that. But the way she said it made Kamsi's skin crawl. It wasn't the voice alone, but what carried it, the echo of something ancient and indifferent, as though her sister's mouth had lent itself to a voice that didn't belong in the world of the living. That night, Mama Igioma called Pastor Oki from the Pentecostal church down the road. He arrived with a bottle of anointing oil and a Bible, so worn it looked older than the town itself. But the moment he stepped into Amaka's room, the candle flickered again, even though it had never been lit. He left less than 10 minutes later, muttering prayers and refusing to meet Kamsi's eyes. Later that evening, as the sky darkened again and the moon rose without enthusiasm, Kamsi returned to Amaka's room alone. She brought with her 3 things: their grandmother's Bible, a bundle of old cowries tied in red thread, and the notebook where she'd been sketching the symbol over and over. Amaka didn't move when she entered. The room felt colder now, like the walls themselves had stepped back. Kamsi sat on the floor across from her sister, the candle between them, unlit but humming faintly. "You used to be afraid of the dark," she began softly, her voice thin but steady. "Do you remember? When we were kids, you'd sneak into my room every time Nipa took light." Amaka said nothing. Her eyes flickered, as if memory stirred but refused to fully rise. "You said I was your flashlight," Kamsi continued. Because I always lit up when you needed me. I think something inside you still remembers that. The mirror remained silent, but something in the room shifted, air growing dense, scent turning metallic. Kamsi took the cowries and placed them gently before the mirror, then cracked open the Bible to a verse her grandmother had once whispered into her ears during a fevered night. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. She read it slowly, deliberately, as if each word was a stone laid down to form a path out of the dark. Amaka blinked once. Then again. Her lips parted. For a moment, Kamsi saw her, truly saw her sister, the way she used to look before the fame, before the lights, before the voices. But just as quickly, something else returned. Amaka smiled, a small, hollow thing. You were always the flashlight, she whispered. But I found my own kind of light now. And then she laughed. Not loudly. Not wildly. Just enough to let Kamsi know she wasn't laughing alone. That night, Kamsi couldn't sleep. Not even the comfort of her room could soothe the knot tightening in her chest. The house had become something else, something unfamiliar. Even the walls seemed to breathe. Shadows stretched too far across the floor. The mirror in the hallway, one they'd walked past for years, now seemed to tilt slightly, though no one had touched it. Kamsi sat at her desk, eyes fixed on her notebook. She had drawn the eye again, but this time it had changed. It blinked. Not in the literal sense, but in a way only the spirit could perceive. She flipped the page, heart pounding. On the next sheet, a drawing of their home. Only in this version, the roof had split open, and from the crack, dozens of hands reached skyward. She hadn't remembered drawing that. She hadn't even remembered picking up her pencil. A cold sweat trickled down her back. From the corner of her room, she heard a whisper. Faint. Almost imagined. Closer now, her head jerked up. The door was closed. The window was shut. She stood, turned, and stared at her reflection in the mirror hanging above her dresser. But it wasn't her. Not exactly. The eyes were too still. Too certain. Her own eyes blinked, but the reflection did not. And then slowly the reflection smiled. By morning, the mirror in Kamsi's room had cracked straight through the center, though no sound had been heard during the night. The line split her reflection in two, one side still, the other faintly blurred as if the glass was unsure of its memory. The rest of the house carried itself with a fragile stillness, like a patient recovering from a fever that hadn't quite broken. Amaka hadn't come out of her room. Her door remained closed, not locked, but heavy with something unseen. When Mama Igioma knocked and called her name softly, there was no answer, only the faint sound of fabric moving, as though someone was dragging their hands across bed sheets, searching for an edge to hold. Kamsi sat in the parlor with her notebook on her lap, not writing, not drawing, just staring. The pages were full now, crowded with shapes, eyes, symbols, and places she didn't recall visiting. At the center of one page, she had drawn herself, only the figure wore Amaka's face. No matter how long she stared at it, she couldn't understand why. She heard their mother crying quietly in the kitchen, the sound of a spoon clinking inside a glass cup, over and over. It had been days, maybe longer. Time had lost its weight inside their home. Daylight came and went without explanation. The TV hadn't been turned on. Their phones stayed untouched. Amaka's once bustling accounts had fallen into silence, comments piling like leaves under a tree no one remembered to water. Someone had sent a message asking if she was alive. It wasn't the question that struck Kamsi. It was that they had to ask it all. The sky that evening turned a sickly orange, the kind of hue that seemed to seep into the skin rather than shine from above. It was the same hour, just before dusk, that Kamsi stood before Amaka's door again. She hadn't tried since that first morning, not because she was afraid of what she'd find, but because something inside her had been waiting for the right moment, the right feeling, the right silence. She placed her hand on the doorknob and paused. Her heart wasn't racing. It beat slowly, deliberately, like it understood the stakes in a way her mind could not. She opened the door without knocking. The room smelled of wax and something old, like forgotten incense. Amaka sat in the center of the room with the mirror directly in front of her. This time there was no candle. No light at all, except the faint orange glow bleeding through the curtain. Her body was still. She didn't turn, didn't speak. But her reflection did. It smiled first. A small, knowing thing. Then it began to raise its hand slowly, finger pointing, not at Kamsi, but at the floor beside Amaka, where a book lay open, its pages covered in the same symbols Kamsi had drawn days ago. Except they weren't drawn in ink. They were written in what looked like a dark red fluid, dried and cracked at the edges. Kamsi stepped in without hesitation. She walked up to her sister and placed both hands on her shoulders. "You're still here," she said quietly. "You haven't crossed fully." Amaka blinked, finally, as though returning from the edge of sleep. She whispered, "I opened it. I didn't know it wouldn't close behind me." Kamsi nodded. "Then we'll close it together." What happened next was not loud. There were no screams, no thunder, no lights exploding or walls shaking. What followed was a quietness so pure it hummed. Kamsi picked up the book from the floor and turned the pages slowly, her thumb brushing over each symbol, repeating them backwards, not the way they were written, but the way she'd heard them in her dreams. The syllables came easily, falling from her tongue like names she once knew and had only just remembered. Amaka's eyes began to clear, the glaze slowly fading like steam from a window. But the reflection in the mirror grew darker, less defined. The smile melted, twisted, and the figure began to retreat, not walking but shrinking, folding inward like paper scorched at the corners. Kamsi continued chanting, voice steady, even as the room grew colder, the air biting at her skin like frost in a dry season. The final word came as a whisper, barely more than breath. And then silence. True silence. Not the kind that waits. The kind that rests. The mirror went black. Not shattered, not fogged, just black. As though whatever had lived behind the glass had finally turned its back. Amaka fell forward into Kamsi's arms, shaking. Her skin burned with heat, sweat pouring from her forehead. "I saw them," she gasped. "They looked like us. But they weren't. They said you were the balance. That only you could close what I opened." Kamsi didn't respond. She simply held her tighter, as though trying to gather all the scattered pieces of her sister into her chest. 3 days passed before Amaka smiled again. A real smile. Not the hollow one crafted for cameras, or the dazed one she wore in the weeks after the motel. This one came like sunrise after a storm, hesitant but certain. She sat on the veranda with Mama Igioma, peeling oranges and watching schoolchildren run past the gate. The house, though still heavy with memory, had begun to breathe differently. The mirrors had all been covered, some with old wrappers, others taken down completely. Kamsi had placed the old notebook beneath her bed and refused to open it again. She had not burned it. Not yet. Some things are better buried than destroyed. In the evenings, Amaka sometimes reached for her phone, only to place it back down again. Her followers had begun to speculate, rumors spreading like wild grass about her sudden disappearance, her last mysterious live stream, the black screen. Some believed it was all for clout. Others claimed she had died, and the account was now controlled by handlers. Amaka never responded. Kamsi would sometimes catch her staring into empty spaces, not in fear, but in thought. "They said I could have had everything," she once murmured. "But they didn't say what it would cost." Kamsi, sitting beside her with her back against the wall, replied without looking up, "Everything worth having costs something, but not everything offered is worth the price." And with that, the sun dipped behind the hills, leaving only the soft sound of leaves rustling in a wind that had finally returned to its natural rhythm. The door was shut now. Not locked. Just closed. Not every light leads to brightness, and not every trend is meant for your path. In a world full of noise, learn to listen to your spirit. Some doors glitter from the outside, but carry shadows on the other side. Protect your peace, guard your soul, and never trade your truth for attention. Fame gained in haste can become a burden carved in silence. Don't be quick to follow what you don't understand, because not everything that goes viral is harmless. May your eyes never be blind to hidden dangers. May your spirit stay awake, even when the world around you sleeps. May the wisdom to say, no, rest in your mouth before trouble comes near. May your name never be called in the wrong places at the wrong time. May your destiny never be hijacked by curiosity or carelessness. You will not walk into doors that were never yours to open. You will not answer calls meant to destroy. You will shine, but in your own time, your own way, and with peace that lasts. If you believe this prayer, say a loud and joyful amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.